All right, let's dive into the absolutely incredible story of a man who literally didn't fear kings. Picture this. In an age where an entire nation had kind of forgotten their deliverer, bowing to idols carved by human hands instead, a voice suddenly rises from the harsh silence of the desert. We're talking about Elijah, the prophet of fire. We are going to trace an epic journey of absolute defiance, stunning triumph, and, honestly, some deep, relatable human struggle.
We are jumping right into the action with this devastating cold open. Elijah basically walks right into the palace, unannounced by the way, and delivers this sudden, fearless decree straight to King Ahab. As surely as the Lord lives, there will be neither rain nor dew in these years, except by my word. I mean, he doesn't ask permission, he just instantly shuts the heavens, exposes their false weather gods, and sets the ultimate stakes for the entire nation.
And man, the sensory reality of this decree was severe. For 3 long years, you have devastating drought and spiritual darkness spreading across the land of Israel. The earth cracked, the skies completely silent. Famine spread like a slow shadow, all because the nation, under the heavy influence of Queen Jezebel, had blindly traded the truth of the living God for the empty illusions of idol worship.
Now, this part brilliantly illustrates the impossible contrast of his early journey. We're looking at divine provision in absolute scarcity. On one hand, Elijah is totally isolated at the brook Cherith, being kept alive by unclean ravens miraculously bringing him bread and meat. On the other hand, he's sent to a poor, starving widow in a foreign land. By human logic, she had absolutely nothing. Yet through divine provision, her handful of flour and jug of oil miraculously never ran dry.
So that brings us to the showdown on the mountain, the ultimate clash between truth and illusion. Because, the days of hiding are over. Elijah is called out of the shadows for this massive, highly public confrontation on Mount Carmel.
Just imagine the sheer frenzy of this scene. You've got 450 prophets of Baal dancing, desperately leaping around, eventually cutting themselves and crying out for just a single spark of fire. But what happens? They are met with a completely silent sky. Hours and hours pass, deafening silence, punctuated only by Elijah's sharp mockery.
Then it's Elijah's turn, and notice his calculated confidence here. He doesn't just build an altar. First, he rebuilds the broken altar of the Lord with 12 stones representing Israel. Then he arranges the wood and the sacrifice. But here's the kicker. To prove there are absolutely no tricks, he has them completely drench everything with 4 heavy jars of precious water 3 separate times, right in the middle of a massive drought.
And then boom! Without warning, the fire of the Lord falls straight from heaven. It doesn't just burn the sacrifice, it completely obliterates the soaked wood, the stones, the dust, and vaporizes every single drop of water in the trench. The divided crowd is literally forced to fall on their faces, instantly recognizing the undeniable truth of the living God.
So, the crucial point in all this is the pivot. Shortly after this epic victory, Elijah actually outruns King Ahab's chariot in the miraculous rain that finally ends that 3-year drought. But then, how does our victorious hero suddenly crash? I mean, really, how does a man who just called down fire from heaven turn around and run away in absolute fear?
Well, let's get into burnout and the whisper, the private collapse following public victory. It's time we look at this sudden flight not just as fear, but as profound, deeply relatable exhaustion.
It all kicks off with this terrifying message from Queen Jezebel. May the gods punish me with all rigor if by tomorrow at this hour I do not do to you what you did to them. Completely unbroken by the miracle on Mount Carmel, she issues this icy, direct death threat. And for Elijah, this is it. It's the breaking point. The sheer emotional weariness completely catches up to him, sending our exhausted prophet running frantically south into the unforgiving wilderness.
Public victory so often masks private loneliness. Here we see a completely broken Elijah collapsed under the fragile shade of a broom tree. He is so emotionally empty that he literally cries out, "Enough, Lord, take my life." It's such an incredibly raw human moment. But God meets him right there in his burnout, sending an angel to tenderly feed him baked bread and water, sustaining him when he just couldn't take another step.
Strengthened by that, he walks 40 days to a cave at Mount Horeb. And here is where he experiences this crazy sensory overload of empty forces. First, there's a violent, relentless wind. We're talking winds so strong it shattered the rocks and tore through the mountains. Deafening.
Yet, the divine presence was nowhere to be found in that violent wind. Second, the tension just builds as the ground violently rips open right in front of him. A massive earthquake shakes the Earth's very foundations, its raw, terrifying destruction. But again, God's presence isn't in the earthquake either. Third, an intense, consuming fire starts dancing wildly before the cave. Think about it. This is the very element Elijah is famous for. Yet, surprisingly enough, God is completely absent from these flames.
And that brings us to the emotional core of this whole explainer, the whisper. A soft, gentle, almost imperceptible voice. When Elijah hears this, he finally steps out of the cave. He realizes that true divine presence, power, and emotional restoration actually reside right there. True power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it heals you through a gentle whisper that reminds you, hey, you aren't alone, there are still 7,000 faithful left in Israel.
Which leads us to confronting the crown, standing against the corruption of power. Refreshed and emotionally restored by that whisper, Elijah's mission resumes, shifting to a really stark standoff with absolute political corruption.
We absolutely have to look at the tragedy of Naboth's vineyard. Naboth was an innocent man, brutally murdered in a staged trial with false witnesses. Why? Literally just so King Ahab could steal his family inheritance because he threw a tantrum over wanting a piece of land. It perfectly highlights the chilling, ruthless efficiency of Jezebel and Ahab's corrupt power.
But Elijah boldly intercepts the king right there in that stolen vineyard. The man of the wilderness stands toe-to-toe with the corrupt crown and delivers a terrifying sentence of justice. In the very place where dogs licked up Naboth's blood, dogs will lick up your blood. Yes, yours. He proves once and for all that absolutely no earthly throne is ever above heavenly law.
All right, moving into the chariot and legacy, passing the flame to the next generation. As we enter the final chapter of Elijah's life on earth, the focus shifts. How does a powerful movement ensure it doesn't just die with its leader?
Well, it's all about this core concept of the mantle. This is far more than a simple piece of clothing. It is the ultimate, weighty symbol of transferred authority, divine calling, and enduring legacy. When Elijah throws his mantle over a young farmer named Elijah, it's an undeniable transfer of authority that sets the entire unseen future into motion.
And notice Elisha's absolute, radical commitment here. He doesn't just agree to tag along. He literally burns his wooden plow and sacrifices his 12 yoke of oxen to cook a feast for his people. Talk about burning the boats. There is no turning back, no backup plan. It shows us what true, unreserved dedication to a calling actually looks like. Fast forward to their final quiet walk together. Approaching the boundary waters of the Jordan River, Elijah takes that mantle and strikes the water. The river parts, and they cross on dry ground, a beautiful repetition of ancient miracles. And right there, Elijah asks for a double portion of Elijah's spirit to carry the heavy mission forward. Then comes the visually stunning climax. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a chariot of fire and horses of flame descend in a whirlwind. It forcefully separates the two men, and Elijah, the prophet of fire, is taken alive right into eternity. But as he's taken upward, his mantle drops back down to earth, landing right at Elisha's feet. I want to leave you with this really provocative thought. Elisha picked up that mantle and immediately parted the waters himself. So when the fire of our own victories fades and the silence sets in, who will carry your mantle? How are we preparing our own legacies to outlast us? Thanks so much for exploring this fascinating explainer with me.